recording. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome everyone out in social media land. We are here again for another episode of A Youth Perspective. I am Dr. Kent Key, and we are the Flint Public Health Youth Academy. We're here to talk about health. We come from a public health perspective, and we have a lot of engaging shows that talk about the intersection of public health and culture, public health and pop culture, public health and social media, public health and everyday living. And so we're here to talk today about intersectionality. We're excited to have this conversation as we talk about the multiple identities that each of us have and how they intersect, and then how does that at some point impact our health, not only our physical, mental, and all of our health actually, but also how we engage with others. And so we're excited today to have our co-hosts, Kayla Shannon and Cruz Duhart, who are going to lead us into this engaging conversation on intersectionality. So Kayla and Cruz, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back once again, and thank you so much for being here to hear us discuss this issue and kind of gain a youth's perspective on intersectionality. So I'm going to get right into it, and we wanted to start this week's discussion a little bit differently because we wanted to give context to this conversation. And so I'm going to show you all. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm not going to show you all that. Zoom is so fun. Okay, share screen. Alrighty. Okay, so we wanted to frame this conversation sort of beginning with the social location wheel. And so I'm going to start off by sort of explaining what it is, and then we're going to get more so into the conversation of intersectionality using this wheel as an example or sort of the foundation of that discussion. And so the social location wheel was something that was created to educate people about the portions of their identity and to more critically analyze like how portions of your identity show up in different spaces, how they affect you in your day-to-day life, how they affect you socially, how they affect you politically in political spaces as far as legislation goes, as far as policy goes. How do your different identities or the different ways that you identify affect the way that you are perceived throughout society and the way that you experience American democracy. And so that's what this is. And so on the inside, you'll see sort of the demographic markers that we're familiar with. So that's race and ethnicity, whether you're Black, white, but that also is whether you're Indigenous, whether you're African American, all of those things fall into race or ethnicity. Your age, which I mean, we all understand what age is, your gender identity or expression, which is how you show up in a space for like, do you dress masculinely or do you dress femininely, or do you when someone perceives you, what do they automatically assume that your gender identity is, which is separate from your actual gender, which is which is how you identify, which is separate from how others perceive you. I hope that makes sense. So for example, a trans woman, her gender is a woman, but her gender identity or expression is feminine. I hope that makes sense. So then the next one being your national origin, which is just where you were born. So that takes us into the conversation of whether you're an immigrant or a natural born citizen. The next one is sexual orientation, which goes into your sexual preferences. So whether you are heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bi, I mean, the spectrum goes on and on. And then lastly, in this inner circle, we have mental or physical ability, which is whether or not you have mental health struggles, but also the physical disabilities that we're aware of. And all of these things on the inside impact, once again, the way that we show up in social spaces, but then also the way we experience American privilege. And so that sort of goes into the conversation of privilege, like why is all of this important? Because these indicators, specifically just talking about the middle, these indicators determine the amount of privilege or the extent of privilege that you receive in an American in American society. Specifically, we're speaking about, but this, I'm sure, can also be expanded to other societies and other countries. So for example, me as a Black woman, I don't experience privilege in the race or ethnicity category, nor do I experience privilege in the gender category, because those two demographic markers do not experience privilege under American democracy, under the American system. So then we go out into the second circle, which is sort of more the nuanced portions of identity. These are the things that aren't so cut and dry as the middle circle is. So that's things such as appearance. As we all know, appearance is something, or what is considered socially attractive is something that's ever changing. So whether or not you're considered socially attractive, though, has an impact on how you show up in social spaces and how you're perceived. Another thing is work experience. Now, the amount of work experience you have and whether or not you're considered a professional varies depending on what job that you're in. So that's also something that's, once again, more subjective, but the understanding being the more work experience you have, the more privilege or respect that you receive from others. Next is level of education. So that's whether did you make it to high school? Did you receive your high school diploma? Did you receive higher education past that point? Political belief, so that's whether you're a partisan, are you a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian? But that can also go down into specific political policy issues, such as, are you pro-life or pro-choice? Next would be family. So that's just another thing we can't control, but who you were raised by, who you're associated with. I think that this is something that obviously impacts many people. For example, if you come from a family that's not considered by social expectations to be proper, that impacts the way that you're perceived, whether you yourself are proper, whatever that means. Your association with your family has an impact on the way that you show up in social spaces. I keep repeating that because I want you all to because that's the most important part of this conversation. All of this is about the way you show up in social spaces and the way that you are the way these demographic markers impact your experience of the American democracy. So then organizational role. That goes more so into the extent of power that you have. For example, a CEO is going to have more power than an employee. So that's not necessarily based on work experience, because there are privileges, for example, that certain teachers have over others because they have seniority. But organizational is more like, rather than teacher to teacher years, it's like principal versus teacher. And then we have language and communication skills. That goes into, do you speak English in America? Because that's the language that many of us speak. And unfortunately, because America isn't as hell-bent on their students learning a second language, it becomes an obstacle for people who do not speak English or aren't fluent in English or don't speak English with a quote unquote American accent. That's a barrier, and it affects the way that they show up. So that can be speaking in a language other than English, but it can also be speaking a dialect of English, such as Ebonics. So the way that if a person was raised to speak Ebonics, that affects the way that people perceive them and the way that they experience American democracy. Going forward, we have income. So that's whether, is your family considered economically disadvantaged? Are you considered middle class? Are you upper class? Are you in the top 1% that makes more, that makes most of America's money? That absolutely, I'm sure I don't even have to explain the impact that has on how you show up in spaces. And then last but not least, we have religion. And in America, those with privilege are those who are Christian. We're all aware of this. It's we have In God We Trust on our money. We have one, see, I ain't said the pledge in so long. I don't even know. Injustice under God. It says something like that. So the point being, the sort of default, even though we have a separation of church and state, Christians experience privilege because you're not necessarily questioned. When you in America walk into a room and tell people you're Christian, you're not really going to get side eyes. Whereas if you introduce yourself as Muslim, it's a completely different experience because of stigmas we've placed around other religions. And so all of this, once again, goes into the way that we as people, as citizens, or as not citizens, I mean, whoever you are, it affects the way that we show up in spaces, and the intersections of these different identity markers is what we want to discuss today, because it has a very distinct impact. A Black woman has a different experience of America than a white man, or a Black, or a Middle Eastern Muslim woman, will say, has a very different experience than a person who has a mental disability and is a man. It affects the way that we show up in space. Oh, sorry. And so all of these things, once again, go into the conversation of intersectionality. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Cruz.
Hey, so as what Taylor was saying, there is a difference, and these things play like kind of hand to hand together. You aren't just one label, you aren't just one thing. We as humans are, multiple things. You can't just be one thing at all. And so I'm going to move on to, I have a definition from Merriam-Webster, which says intersectionality is the complex cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experience of marginalized individuals or groups. To kind of add and summarize and paraphrase, it's basically suggesting that the aspects of life that each person carries, regardless of how visible or vocal they are about it, these are just the things that are just help make you you. With that, I want to start opening up the discussion to our panelists, and we want to talk about some of the questions we planned. So our first one is, do you ever feel like some of your labels are focused on more than the others? And I can start off, actually, if you like. Simply put, one of the things that's focused the most upon me is my Black skin. I mean, me being African American is very visible to you. You could sort of guess that just by looking at me. And because of that, there are certain stigmas that are placed upon me, prejudice and discrimination. But I'm more than just being Black. And so these roles and these things connect to the other things that I'm part of. I'm a college student. I'm young. All those things add up and add to each other. And those are really, me being Black is the one that's focused on the most, partially because I'm a minority. I'm gonna pass this on to someone else, but I'll come back and add to that. Kayla, you wanna go?
Sure. I would say that more than other identity markers, I mean, Cruz already touched on just my Blackness, but I would also say my womanhood. It's also something, because I am female presenting, or woman presenting. People, it's the first thing you see, I guess, and so there are assumptions that people make of me. There are assumptions that people make. There are limitations that people place on me automatically without knowing who I am or what I'm capable of or what I've done. There are expectations that people have of me. Like, for example, because I'm a Christian and I attend church, when I'm at church, and for example, like food is being passed out, or I'm even at home, like with family, if food is being passed out, it's like I'm with the women in the kitchen, sort of thing. And so these are like, it's not as if anyone in my lifetime has ever demanded me to the kitchen, but they're just like underlying assumptions that are made, which I really want to touch on, because all of these impacts don't necessarily have to be blatant or overt, but it's the implication of these things that cause such major impacts in people's lives. Who would someone else like to touch on this question?
Sure. Could you kind of, so basically we're just describing like how our different like traits in the social wheel kind of like connect. Okay. Or like, all right, well, I say it's interesting with me. I'm Latino, I'm mixed, and I'm, you know, I'm Catholic and male, and you know, just not really in my church. I don't know, it's a big topic with like religion, but sometimes I don't know, it just seems like a conflict going on because, you know, you got a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to get too political, but, you know, certain Christians are, you know, leaning towards certain areas, you know, politically that go against my whole existence. And it's kind of hard given the, you know, the Our Father, you know, interlocking hands with one another. And I mean, I know I'm not against, you know, unity and all that whatsoever, but it's just hard to give you peace be with you, interlock hands knowing dang well, oh, you know, you Spics need to go back to the other side of the country, you need to go here and there. Like, it's just really difficult. So I would just say that identity is kind of hard sometimes. And yeah, that just, it conflicts, you know. And going to parochial school too, that that's a whole nother Zoom call, but you know, that really, it makes you kind of, I don't know, I was born and raised Catholic, I plan on being with it, but just certain things I disagree with. That's just the thing, you know. I don't like it how I feel like many other religions and different institutions go through this too, but just the hypocrisy, you know. I'm like, practice what you preach, you know. Like, how can you be telling me to be respectful about other people's stuff, but then allow other students to say, you know, horrible things about other races and bring politics and stuff from family dinner up in the mix during class time? Like, just that doesn't sit well with me. So sometimes, I don't know, it makes me want to migrate and do something different. But then again, I love being Catholic. I love my faith and what it's done for me. It's given me the opportunity to be here with all of you. But yeah, like I said, just sometimes there's little conflicts between those, you know. So.
Right. And that's kind of where those things too, like, sort of connect there. I mean, like I was saying earlier, you're not just one thing. So I might ask you, would you consider that being Latino then would be like one of the ones that people notice the most? And what type of things are associated with that?
So like, what do you mean? Like ideas of Latinos?
Whatever you think feels
okay.
like right to talk about.
All right. Well, so like I said, I'm mixed. Most like I said, I don't know. I'd probably take the ancestry.com thing because I don't know for sure. I just know that, you know, my mom, she was mixed. She had black, white, and Mexicana in her. My dad's all Mexican, so all that came together, and boom, got Tomas Esteban Teo. So, but the most obvious one I would say is I look his Latino. And of course, I probably identify with it, but I would just say really, kind of with my experiences in like school, back in parochial school, it really carried with me that identity. Like, I couldn't just sit around being brown, or even if I was darker or light, whatever the case. Well, no, just hold on, let me try and get my point. My bad, I'm going all over. But my point is, I couldn't just sit around and let people say things about my people, you know, my culture, looking like how I am, being this, or if I was darker, you know. So that really impacted me. That's like the first thing people see. I can't really say what I think other people think of Latinos. That's from their perspectives and their thoughts or whatever have you. So I don't know. I've just heard a bunch of different things from different people. Like I said, I've been around many different schooling environments. I've been in some of the, not a drop of millennium, hardly, or the people that were there were not really representing. And then I've been with more, thankfully, millennium. And, you know, I've been in places with more faith, places with less. So like I said, I've just heard different things. So I can't really say clearly what I think people think of Latinos, but like I said, it's just mixed, like that Personality song by Kanye. So.
And I think, Tomas, you also brought up a really great point about the tensions that can sometimes be created between our identity markers. I think sometimes there's this false narrative that you sort of have to choose between, like, am I going to be Black today or am I going to be a woman? Like, that's not how it works though. Like, or in conversations or in social movements, there's this pressure to prioritize. Like for me as a Black woman, I've sometimes showed up in Black spaces and had Black people be like, oh, well, you don't want Black liberation because you always talking about that feminist stuff. And I'd be like, well, I'm a woman. Or I show up in feminist spaces and they prioritize the feminist experience of white women without acknowledging the intersections of oppression that exist. And so I think it's very important for us to have these conversations because there are sometimes unnecessary tensions that are created between our identity. Because as Tomas said, he's no less Catholic because he's Latino. He's no less Latino because he's young. He's no less young because like all of these things, he's an amalgamation of all of these things. And so to attempt to separate them is to not accept Tomas or Kayla or Cruz for who we are, because we are all of these things, and all of these things should not only be acknowledged as a part of our personhood, but all of these things should be acknowledged and considered with legislations that impact us. So when you're considering legislations that impact Kayla, we're not just thinking about Black legislations or legislation that impact Black community, but we're also considering the legislation that impact women, that impact young people, that impact you, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Amir, do you want to? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Amir. Did you want to say something, Amir, before I speak?
Yes. So with me, I echo the sentiment, like, what Cruz said about how, like, like people usually they see me at first and they're like, oh, my skin color or whatever. And then, sometimes it comes with like the assumptions of like, or preconceived notions of what you do or what you think about or that type of different thing. But I'm just no other less than any other race or any other, demographic out there. So I think that, it's good to know that, I'm individually me, and that's just what it is, So.
Right. I wanted to add on to that, if that's okay, Dr. Key. So one of the other things that I'm labeled as a man, and I do identify as a man. And so with that comes privilege. And there's different types of things that are also echoed upon it. And it is a different experience than women's. And I had to, when you speak about intersectionality, you have to recognize that difference. And everyone's experience, even within having these same labels, are not the same as well. Everyone's experience can also be very, very different. And that all you have to take all of these things into account, because when you're doing things like affecting policies that impact people, this is really what you're getting down to. When you let's say make a law about abortion, that's going to affect a lot of people. It's affecting women, it's affecting the impoverished. There's all these levels that you have to acknowledge. And when a lot of the issue comes to when you try to act like they're not there at all. And so there's differences, and you need to acknowledge them and speak and listen to those different people who will be affected by those different things. And so, like I said, with me being a man, I attempt at least now to go out of my way and listen to these other experiences of women, for example. I try not to be that guy in that space where it's like we're learning about Black liberation, we're discussing, and then we're like, oh, let's not talk about Black feminism, let's just talk about Black people. No, because in theory, the concept is if, Black women are free, all Black people are free. And so you have to start thinking that way, where you kind of think about the people who aren't necessarily like you. You have to, take that position. And one of the other things that we haven't discussed yet is our parents and body, for example. People are going to look at me and Amir different, even with that. Amir's more stockier than me. He seems more built than me. And to some people that could be threatening, while to the other people, that's just how he's built, you know what I mean? And when you consider that, our experiences are going to be different as well. We could have the same zip code, but just because I might look, let's say, smaller or frail, to those people, I seem less threatening. And I have to try to understand what it's like, to be in a different person's shoes. But I'm gonna let Dr. Key speak now.
So I just wanted to just share for a moment that, you know, your initial question was, is there any identity that people tend to gravitate to more so than the other? And so, with the caveat that we have various identities that change over time, right? So if you are young, eventually you're gonna not have a young person's identity. You're gonna get older and that identity changes, right? If you go to school, you may have an identity where you're not college educated, but then you may become college educated. So there are some identities that are fluid that can change, but then there are some that you have absolutely no choice in the matter. So picture this. I've been watching too much Golden Girls, right? Sophia says, picture this all the time. Picture this. I'm in Washington, D.C., probably in like 2015. And I'm a keynote speaker at a national conference, right? I'm on the elevator. One of my mentors, who was an older African-American male, he's older, he probably could be my father, old enough to be my father. We're all coming down from a boardroom, and we're going down to the ballroom where I will be speaking in a minute as the keynote. As we're on this elevator, mind you, I'm in Dr. Chemo, got my suit on, got my bow tie on, you know, finna give you this intellectual, you know, encounter about public health and racism and health disparities and inequities. I get our elevator is going down, it stops at a floor. This older European American lady gets on. And when she sees me there, mind you, I still got locks, right? And I'm a Black male. She looks and she grabs her purse tight and look at me and says, 4th floor, please. As if I'm the elevator guy, right? And so I give my mentor this look like, I'm about to go ham real quick on this lady, right? And so he gives me this look and shakes his head. So he saved her that day from me really going off, literally, like really. And when I say go ham, I mean verbally, I don't mean physically. And so anyway, I'm like, I'm thinking like, this is messing with my whole vibe. I was already in my zone, finna do this speech, and this lady is messing with my vibe. So anyway, when we get off, and as I'm being taken around the back to get to where the speakers are sitting, he says, son, no matter what letters you get behind your name, they will always see Black first. And I was just stunned, because he's a medical doctor. And I'm like, that reality really sat in and resonated, right? So, okay, I got myself together, got up, gave the bomb address, keynote address, you know, it was like really great. People were standing in line to come talk to me, get cards and things. Guess who came up to me? The old lady, right? And she says, oh, I didn't know that was you. Now, mind you, I had a suit on, a bow tie, even had my conference badge on. They got your name written on it, where you from, all of that. I said, well, if you had not have just saw a Black person on the elevator and actually looked at me in my face, you probably would have known it was me. And then I walked off, because that was the thing I could really say. But I had to say something, right? Bottom line is, no matter where your intersection of identities come, there are going to be some dominant identities that will just resonate with some people. They're not dominant because they mean more to you per se. They're dominant because that's what resonates to the person that's looking at you. That's what they're looking at. And so I had to learn that. And so as we talk about identities and intersections, I don't know, would it have been different if I had been a Black female as opposed to a Black male? Would she have tightened her purse, right? Because, you know, there is a perception, all Black men steal, right? So, and I get that. All Black men are violent, all Black men, those are perceptions and stereotypes that people have, and so they project them on everyone. And so I just wanted to kind of share, that was my experience in a real life scenario, and that was my experience as an African-American doctor. That was my experience at a national conference, and that was my experience on an elevator that kind of shook me to my core when my mentor said, I don't care how many degrees you get after your name, they will always see Black first. And so it was a learning moment for me. So I just want to share that. That's why Blackness is always the premier identity for me. Then it's my malehood.
Yeah.
See, Dr.
Yeah.
Key, you better than me, because she would have approached me afterwards and I would have been like, miss me, you're
But I
dismissed.
could,
I might have done
I
that
could
too.
not, because there was so many people in line after her to talk to me. So I could not make, because I would have then played into the whole angry Black man. I have to be
Right.
conscious of these other perceptions, right? And so even though I had every right to be angry, I had every right to be irritated, I still had to be aware of my situation and my surroundings and what the broader impact could have been if I had really acted the way I really wanted to act. So there you have
See,
it.
I'd be willing to take my professional hat off. I'd be like, because you tried it today and you got the right one. No, ma'am. Let me educate you real quick. Let me give you words.
I mean, yeah. And I guess Dr. Key just decided to take that moment and be like, oh, this is a learning experience. Let me drop a gem on her real quick. Dr. Key is known to take the high road. But even when I asked this question, what part of why I wanted to ask this question is because in this way we separated our different labels, right? But there's also the intricacy of them being attached to each other, like Dr. Key just pointed out. There's a different perception of just man versus Black man or white man or different things like that. If you see a white man in a suit, you might think he's distinguished, you know what I mean? Things like that. You see a Black man in a suit, you think he's a hustler or something, negative. It has that connotation to it that is not positive at all. And it's because of that prejudice and bias that is brought before you even interact with that person. But I'm going to move on to our next question. Is mental health acknowledged in the different communities that you're a part of?
I'll start this one off, and I'm going to tell you why. In the African American community in general, now that doesn't mean everybody, but in general, we have a strong stigma around mental health. One, because we really don't discuss it with family. You can remember being a little kid and they tell you, that's your cousin over there, but that cousin is a little special. So, like they'll use words like special or different without really sitting us down to talk to us about what it is. There is a stigma behind it. And depending on what region you live in the United States, the stigma continues. Now, out on the West Coast, it's a little bit more easier. Like most people are like, oh yeah, I have a therapist. And it's like, if you don't have a therapist, what's wrong with you, right? Everyone has them. That's just what you're supposed to do. You got jeans, you got shoes, you got a therapist, right? However, in other parts of the country, it's not. And so in my experience of Blackness, it's not something that is embraced, and it's typically looked upon in a negative fashion. And then in my intersection as a male, males tend to not take care of their mental health, not to recognize mental health. So at my intersection of Blackness and maleness, it's very low on the totem pole to really have those discussions, and let alone talk about how mental health impacts those identities.
I would actually, I guess, contradict a little bit Dr. Key in saying that there's definitely a stigma around mental health issues in the African American community. But for me as a Black woman, I have experienced the most uplifting from other Black women over the course of my life. Like, it's just a special kind of something when a Black woman tells me, you got this. When a Black woman tells me you can do it, when a Black woman tells me I've been there, I've felt that, I've seen what you're seeing, and I understand why it's so frustrating, but you can still do it. But you can still dismantle this system, but you can still be the next, the first, the last, the all of it, And so in saying that, I will absolutely agree with the fact that it's not across the board, because mental health is definitely stigmatized everywhere, really, but more specifically, definitely within the Black community. But I would say Black women are the reason that I have any semblance of stability at this point, because between my my Black woman mother, my Black woman grandmother, my Black female mentors, by my Black female friends. Like I just have been so blessed to have such a wonderful community in that way.
That's so excellent. Like I was mouthing the words. That's so cool. I think a lot of where the connection or where the bridge is it also depends on how we're describing mental health in this case. When it comes to like uplifting and being a positive force and an impact, which is definitely a section of mental health. I think the Black community does have that. We have this feeling of wanting to bring each other together and help and rely on each other sometimes. Um, but through an extension of that, there's also the concept of how we deal with mental trauma or things like it. When it comes to depression and things that are adjacent, or different things that some people might not consider average or normal, uh, there's not much assistance there. And this is something that I believe the Black community can work on. When I cross and border that with being a man, no, sadly, I don't feel like there's a lot of focus on it. A lot of things that are reinforced and negatively impacted by men themselves is that men aren't supposed to vent really or express themselves like cry. Anger is for some reason acceptable. But you know, having be able to span the scale of one's mental health, whether that be negative, positive, or, you know, just them living, uh, most men, it's not really a thing that's considered or thought as something that's important. And it's really unfortunate. And when we go even deeper and consider it with Black men, a lot of times it's kind of just that vibe of toughen up. You know what I mean? Sadly, it's something similar to what's Kayla's experience, where it's like, I've been through that. You can go through it too. It's nothing. It's normally sometimes where it's kind of pushed down and repressed. And it's unfortunate because it's that type of thing that evolves problems into sometimes being worse. These things go unresolved, and it's not really healthy for us. But I want to pass it on to someone else.
Well, before someone else comes in, you just said something though that triggered something. Cruz, we had a study in Flint with Dr. Woody Neighbors and myself as the investigators called Man Up, Man Down. And it was a study around Black men and depression. And the concept was, we're taught as African-American men, you know, tough it up, suck it up, be a man. Don't, you know, you don't cry, you don't show weakness. And we're told to man up, but in that, because we're not getting the mental health type of engagement that we need, then it means man down, because at some point we break. And it's kind of like that whole John Henryism theory around that. And so I just want to say that when you said that, it kind of triggered that memory of what we were dealing with a group of Black men that met for like 3 months to talk about mental health. And it was very hard. And depending on the age of it, it was a lot of reluctance. Like because of the older men could not see mental health on the spectrum. They only saw it on the negative end. And so that was just something that I wanted to also bring out as well.
Yeah, I would just say, I think the whole stigma that goes on in the Black community definitely is prevalent in the Latino community as well. You know, with the men too. That's what I was going to touch up on what Cruz was saying about, you know, just, oh, shake it off, you know, get up, you know, be macho and all of that stuff, you know. And, you know, it's really been in there for many years, that whole ideology and stuff. And, you know, if you just look at the trends, I don't know, Dr. Key might know for sure, but I know that I think, what did it say that I think like Black men had the highest suicide rates like recently or something like that. So these stigmas just can already go to show really kind of who is really who's maybe who's getting the advice, you know, that you got this, and maybe who's not, you know. It might be like that, because I know many times that's the whole thing, you know, they think that, you know, that men, oh, you don't need to get this guidance, you need this advice, just man up, you know. That's the thing. Whereas women will be like, oh, that's, you know, that's my angel, and let me just give her advice. So I think really it's just coming together, addressing, having these conversations as a community, so people can, you know, re-examine how they're handling situations, because it does have a big impact. I feel like when you make people aware that their kids will be threatened later down the road with this, because, you know, if you keep they keep getting brushed off, the depression and stuff like that, it's going to lead to that, you know, growing, increasing suicide rate. So I feel like this really is going to help, because people probably step up and be like, you know, I don't want that for my child. You know, I think it's just a restructure of thinking that needs to occur. So that's just what I think on it. And luckily for me, I had parents that were understanding, and they helped me, because, you know, I've had some family members too with some mental health, you know, different experiences. So luckily my family was already familiar with it, and they were able, whenever I had, you know, sometimes a little depression, anxiety from different things, because like I said, it wasn't easy being brown, going to these parochial schools where I was unwanted, you know. So it traumatized me. So luckily I had people to go to in my faith. Even like I said, even though I'm not blaming it completely, because it did help me having faith in God. But I know that's not the story for everybody. Not everybody has that connection. Not everybody has that parent to tell them, you know, it's going to be okay, and let them, you know, like cry on the shoulder or whatever. So, you know, that's just what I really think.
Amir, would you like to go?
Yeah, so a lot of my time, like throughout, like, you know, in high school and stuff like that, I kind of realized that, like, it was just a flurry. I remember there was like a flurry of, you know, people, you know, committing suicide, whether it be like white or black or anything like that. And it was just like, it was just crazy to me to see how much, like, you know, people would go throughout their daily lives and stuff like that, like friends and stuff. You'd have friends, you would never even know like what they're going through inside. And it was just very, it was just very shocking to some people, because I remember a couple people that have, so, you know, sadly have, you know, taken their own lives with different, you know, stressors and stuff like that they were going through. And it's just like, I think we need to, you know, reinforce that, you know, there's a bunch of, you know, people that are going to be there for them. And to try to reinforce that there can be a sort of a secure blanket, you know, be able to, you know, vent to and let out all the emotions that, you know, people are going through at the time.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of that is extended through like the generation gap. I encountered a lot of you that feel as if they don't have, you know, a mentor or someone older, a family member that they can go to and trust with these type of sensitive topics, because they brush them off a lot of times. And I don't think that's necessarily based on for your gender. I think that's just like a human experience. And I think part of that is like what Tomas is saying. We have to extend that hand, restructure our culture to where we can start changing and altering that. Whether that's being that for your friend in the future, you know, being that person for your child. Everyone's suffering is different and their experiences are different, and it's not right to belittle that. And like I said, like, you could go through the same experiences and still feel entirely different. And those feelings aren't, you know, to be dissuaded. They are valuable. That is like part of your living. And so
Can I add
I just
something really
really,
quickly?
yeah. I'm just glad that we were able to hammer that down.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as far as young people within the community of young people, I feel like we're reaching a certain point in time where mental health is sort of becoming a joke for our generation. Where people like joke like I have OCD, or like I'm depressed, like I'm or jokingly say she's bipolar, like it's because we've been exposed, right? Like this is something that we're all very much so aware of, but I don't think we had necessarily had that concrete concept of like the impact of it and what it actually means, and the severity of what mental health of what poor mental health means for a person. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. And then my second point was to speak about the ways in which young people are or their experiences are said to be like less than important, or it's not that serious, or whatever the case may be. I want you all to think about the fact that the way that young people are taught to cope with their experiences is going to impact the way that they're able to cope for the rest of their lives. So if from a young age a person is taught that their experience or their experiences are invalidated, or their emotions are invalidated, they are going to grow to believe, like for example, this is a conversation to be transparent that I had to have with my family, because I've always been a talker, and I've always been a little exaggerative and a little emotional and a little sensitive. But I had to have a conversation with my family, because when I was younger, they used to always tell me like that's not important, or that's not that serious, right? So now into young adulthood, now I'm in college, right? And I have like real stressors, or not that my old ones weren't real, but more severe stressors, I'll say, or a different type of stressor. And now I'm uncomfortable expressing to people that I'm stressed out because I've been told so many times that my feelings are invalid. So these are real impacts. This is why people grow up to bottle things up instead of speak about them. This is why people don't feel comfortable with the title of depression, or claiming the title of depression, or claiming anxiety, or claiming, because we've made them into jokes. We've made them into public spectacles. And so we need to not only get rid of this stigma around mental health, but we need to stop talking about mental health like it's a joke, because it's not. It's very serious, and it has very serious impacts on the lives of young people. And once again, it's because we're having a conversation of intersectionality, it has a very serious impact. But because all of these stressors, for example, the intersection of being Black and being a woman and being young, like that affects my mental health. You understand? So these conversations are very deeply interrelated.
So I will say this, Cruz, really quick before you go to the next question. Many of you have talked about your various identities, and we have talked about, not many of you, we have talked about our various identities. And I know Tomas and Kayla both mentioned their faith in part of their conversation. What role does like that faith piece play in mental health? Because my experience coming from like a traditional Pentecostal upbringing, you just pray it away, or it's not like, it's not so much encouraged. Back then, it really wasn't encouraged to address mental health. It was that spirit, we're going to pray that depression off of you. So what are y'all experiences with that? How do you all react to that? Or have you had type of experiences as your faith identity intersects with your other identities and mental health?
Okay, well, kind of answer to that. And then I had just a little bit after that real quick. I know we got to go to the next one, but I would just say for me, it's kind of like it affects, it might sound different, but it's like a personal thing. And like, not that I can't share it, but it literally hits different. Like the whole faith thing, like you just really gotta, it's just a mindset thing. You gotta like believe literally for it to happen. Like everyone has different encounters with the Lord and all of that. Like me, I'm just speaking facts. Like when I just prayed, I just all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, felt like a calm feeling. Like the anxiety I had, little chest tightness or whatever I was going through on one of those days, it just went away. And I'm like, wow, this works. So I think I'll try something else. So, I mean, like I said, it's different for everybody. Some people, I think that's what I was like at first, because I go to church and I'd be one of those Catholics that your Christians, churchgoers, period, that would just go to church and then forget about it, go about my week. Oh, I'm gonna go back to church. I'd still treat it with respect and love, of course, but I wouldn't really take in what I was taught. I would say for me, I got my faith kind of outside of the church. It was through my stepmom, Jen. She's been on here before, Jennifer. Shout out to her. But she really just told me just to pray. And I was just kind of like a little hopeless. So I'm like, let me just do it and let me just believe in it. And I know it might sound different to people who haven't had an experience like that before. It might be it's easier said than done, because I didn't believe in it. But I was just like, let me just make myself do it. And I just did it. And I think really the approach to prayer, people sometimes get mixed up too. People think that, they're not good enough to pray, or that they got to light a bunch of incense and candles and bow down. Really, it's not like that. You can have a conversation with the Lord, Allah, whoever it is that you look up to, the creator. That's got some indigenous roots in me too. But, like I'm having a conversation with you all here right now. That's what you do with the Lord. So like I said, it's hard to explain it. It just kind of happens to you. Like what they say, the Lord will come to you, or vice versa will come to him. But like I said, it's different. I just believe in it, like it's naturally. So you just got to get that naturally. You got to quit being tense and just do it, like Nike. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah. Kayla, do you want to go first?
Yeah, and I'll just speak very quickly too, because I think Dr. Key, in your question, you sort of framed the experience very well in saying that oftentimes there's this perception in the Christian community, or just in the faith community in general, that like if you have a problem, pray it away. Like, or maybe if for example, if you are experiencing depression or are clinically diagnosed with depression, and they attempt to like rebuke the depression devil out of you. And then let's say you continue to struggle with depression, right? Because it's like an ongoing struggle. Now you're a sinner, or they will claim you to be because it's your fault, right? And so then there becomes this bashing, like not only are you depressed, which they consider to be a sin, they consider that to be your fault, but on top of that, you're continuing to feel depressed. So then you feel this pressure, like, am I not believing right? Like, does God not love me because I'm experiencing mental health issues? Like, did he not make me this way? Am I evil? like did I do this to myself? And I guess I would say to anyone who's experiencing that or is feeling that way or is receiving persecution for mental health, I want you to remember that even Jesus took a break and went into the woods and was like, you know what? Let me come back to God because y'all got me messed up, not paraphrasing, obviously. I'm sure that's not exactly what Jesus said, but I mean, maybe. But even Jesus rested, or even prophets take time to themselves. Even like when you think about meditation, because that's common, prayer, meditation, all of these things are mental health. You understand? So just because they call it something different, prayer, the Bible says, for those of y'all who are Christian, obviously understanding that not all of you are, and I won't get too preachy, but the Bible says to meditate on the word, right? And the reason meditating on the word is so important is because you have to take the moment to connect with the Bible in order to live it out, right? And so I want to draw this parallel to say the reason you meditate with yourself, the reason you care for yourself is so that you can show up wholly and entirely and carry yourself as you. And even if mental health is a struggle for you, taking care of yourself cannot be a sin if God wanted you to live in abundance, right? Like he didn't want you to suffer. That wasn't the intention. So if that's the case, then it definitely can't be a sin to experience mental health struggles.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of the same things. I'm also Christian. But one of the things I wanted to pinpoint is spirituality in the case of whatever that might be for you. I think it's important to have some semblance of it. Like she said, you could meditate, it could be yoga for all I care. You just have to have that sort of thing that's either away from you or something that helps you focus and separates you to some degree. And I think that's really important to have that sort of comfort, you know, and like what was said before, in the Christian faith, there are sometimes some negatives, and that happens when um, different things are brandished by man. But I do believe that with the right intentions and whatever it may be, there is the ability to find hope, positivity, all those different things, and whatever spirituality form that you so choose. And I think it's important to believe in that and don't let anybody undermine that or question that. It's your life and you should be able to claim that. But yeah, that's basically all I have on that. I was going to add to the youth section that, you know, ah, dang, I kind of forgot it now because we kind of transitioned. So I apologize for that. But does anyone have anything else before I move on to the next question? Cool. All right. So, how can the intersections of oppression affect an individual's access to the so-called American dream?
I'll start. Because I wanna make this analogy because analogies are my favorite because I'm a poet. So I don't know. But I want to make the analogy, and people have made so many different kinds of analogies about intersectionality, but here's mine. I want you to consider that we're in a race, right? And for those of you all who have run tracks, you know there's like different kinds of race. Like you have your 100, your 200, your 400. You have hurdles. You have 200 hurdles. You have there are very many different kinds. But I want you to imagine we're all in a 100-meter hurdle race. And and one person, the person in lane 1 has no hurdles. They somehow ended up with a with a lane without hurdle. The person in lane 2 ended up with 1. The person in lane 3 ended up with 2. The person in lane and so on and so forth. I think you all kind of understand the point. Or actually, let me take that back. The person in lane 1 has 1 obstacle. 2 has 2, 3 has 3, 4 has 4. And I say that to say, not experiencing systemic oppression does not mean that a person's life is without obstacle. I feel like that's a common misconception, is that if I tell a person that they are experiencing privilege, then the automatic assumption is that I'm telling them that they've never struggled for anything. And you know that because the initial argument is always like, well, I've worked so hard all my life for everything that I've gotten. I'm not saying that you didn't, right? I'm simply saying that whereas you may have faced one obstacle, there was a person who from the beginning of the race, without doing anything else, had triple yours or had quadruple your obstacles due to nothing they could have controlled. You understand what I'm saying? So I would sort of say that with the American dream being like the end of the race, I guess, or like winning the race, it's easier for others because we're experiencing different obstacles and a different extent of obstacles.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I mean, even another, I just thought of it on the spot. Another kind of analogy, you could think of it like this. It's like you're in the intersection. You are on Saginaw Street. There's a light and there's 4 roads at the intersection. One of them has a nice brick road. The other has a bunch of potholes. The one, because there's 4 parts of the traffic light. We'll just in Tomas's traffic light, there's gonna be 4 parts of it. So on the other part of the traffic light, the light is like with the red, with the little arrow, don't turn on red, and then the other one's all messed up. It's flickering, So everybody has a different path, and their identities really make an impact on that. So that's just what I have to say. Intersectionality, just I don't know, like I said, just looking at the circle, it seemed like the home button of society, kind of like how everything is tied in, and how different people are given different resources than others. So I would just say that's kind of how I think it rolls with achieving the American dream. I feel like it's only aimed, like only one part of the road has the good, perfect light, and all the paint on the lanes is good and all of that. No potholes, none of that. They already fixed the DAM and roads and all that on that side. So that's just what I think, that, some people have it already set for them good before the architect designed the whole road scheme. They already were like, oh, this lane is going to get it good. So that's just what I think as far as achieving the American dream.
And since we just doing analogies, I'm gonna extend on both of those. Either one works. We'll say the race for this one. Even with the obstacles in place, sometimes you don't start at the same spots either. And that also has a different role, whether that be like how we talked about, one of the ones and part of the wheel is your family. And whether that means you come into, a more higher income family in a certain place, and that now impacts your education because you got better schooling and things like that. And so all these things do play a role into it. And, someone wise told me, that person's actually on this call. They told me that there's no point in having some semblance of an oppression Olympics. We're not here to compare our suffering or anything like that, but we are here to try to even out that playing field and make it more possible and give more potential for most of us to get this American dream, because that's really what America supposedly boasts itself about, is having that potential and opportunity to chase after the things that you want. And so I do think these different intersections or intersectionalities do play a role in having that potential. Me being a man on impact, just me being born, there's a higher chance of me being paid more than someone doing the same amount of my work if they're a woman. And that's just something I can't help, and it's wrong. But some people will believe that it's a privilege that they desire that is supposed to stay that same way. And that's really the issue that when we come to, when we try to extend that bridge and say, you have this privilege that I don't have, the outlook that we're trying to give you is that this is just something that the opportunity, all these different things that I was not afforded. And the best way to finally receive that ending conversation that we truly want is for both sides to acknowledge like that the person who necessarily had less obstacles wasn't also the person who put them there inherently. It's these institutions and systems that set it up. And you know, because they believe that they worked hard for all those different things that they've gained, they don't want that to be taken away from them. And I understand that to a degree because the different things that I've been able to achieve, I don't want that to be taken away from me either. And so what it really has to be is extending that branch on each side and, you know, acknowledging the worth and the value of each of those angles and understanding that, yes, I was afforded these opportunities. And let's work together to make it so that these opportunities are accessible to everyone. And so, yeah, that's basically it. Does anybody want to add to that?
Yes, I do. I want to say really quickly, I know this is not my words. I know someone else said this. I'm just not sure who. I'm sure many people have said this actually, but the American dream is a nightmare for some communities, which means that for some people, not only does their identity affect their access, but for some people, because of their identity, the American dream is at their expense. So once again, I can't remember who said this, but in the context of that, they talked about, for example, slavery. The institution of slavery created generational wealth for millions of people, probably billions when you consider it at the international level. Created generational wealth, or at least the beginnings of it, for very many people. But slavery, what allowed one person to accomplish the American dream, was at the expense of millions of lives, right? It what set some people forward, and not only that, but I want you all to understand that, like, there are people who are still doing those same kinds of jobs. There are immigrants who are still coming to this country, and first of all are not allowed rights or the ability to vote, but continue to work in fields for us so that we can have strawberries and corn, and we ain't complaining about that. Ain't heard no one, or no healthcare either. Cruz brought to my attention. So, and we're not complaining about that. In all of these conversations that I've heard about sending immigrants back to where they came from, don't nobody bring up the impact they have on our economy, because who's gonna work the fields if they leave? And to be clear, I don't think that that's I don't think that it's fair for them to work that, and I definitely don't think it's fair for them to have to work under the conditions and given the pay that they do. But I want to be clear that they have an impact on our functioning. Our society wouldn't function. Sorry, y'all. I just saw something. Our society wouldn't function without them. And so I wanted to be very clear about that, and just bring up that perspective.
I would say, just to add on real quick, I know we're kind of crunching on time, but great point. I'm glad you brought that up, Kayla, because that's what I was trying to mention too. But I think it seems like a brainwashing technique in a way, the American dream, you know, that all your struggles are justified just for that dream. You know, you just got to work harder. You know, you just got to study more. You just got to do more of this and this. Meanwhile, you went to a school that didn't have no AP courses, didn't prep you for no SAT test or nothing like that. And then you get denied. So I feel like it's a false reality for many. And yeah, it just seems like a brainwashing technique. And if you're not careful, then you can let that consume you. So
say it louder for the people in the back. It really is. Kayla, I'm gonna take this next question. In what ways have we seen people at the intersection silenced or erased throughout American history?
Speak to this because it's actually something that I was just researching for a class. So let's talk about American history, because all of us were educated in America, and so all of us have taken an American history class, right? Let's talk about the percentage of Black people in power that you learned about, or the amount of African American history that you learned, or the amount of women's history that you learned, or the amount of history that you learned that was about immigrants that weren't European American, or the amount of history that you learned about that wasn't and from a Christian perspective, or was a false perspective, or was a false representation of what was true. Or when we learned about the Trail of Tears, for example, and didn't learn about the real impact on the indigenous community, we just learned that Americans killed a whole bunch of indigenous people and it was like, oops, our bad, but now we're cool, so it's fine. Like, we don't learn about the actual generational impact that this has, which is why people have no concept of intersectionality and the impact of it. But anyway, going back, sorry. This is erasure. This is silencing. By not including my history as a part of the history that matters, the history that is important, you're invalidating my accomplishments. By reducing conversations of Black people to slavery and civil rights, you are implying that the rest of our accomplishments in the sciences, in the social sciences, in politics, do you know? Cause let me put y'all up on game. Cause do you know the number of Black people that were behind the scenes helping to build the legislation that created our country and didn't get credit? And we don't know their names? Like, please. Like, our founding fathers were not just consulting amongst white people. Let's just be clear. And so this is erasure. The fact that we don't know these people's stories, the fact that we don't know these people's names or understand the implications of American exploitation on marginalized communities, that's erasure and silencing.
Yeah, and I'm gonna one up that even further. How dare they say that there's not enough time and space in these American history class, and then they teach the same things each year? Blasphemy. But to step past that, I mean, yeah, there's so many things that have been erased that aren't common knowledge. Now, if you go and try your hardest to find them, there is potential to finding these things. But how do you know to look for them if it's never been talked about before? Kayla just let me know something to do. I did not know that they were a part of the process. But something else I didn't know last semester is that there were a lot of free Black people during slavery. And that's not really talked about either. And that one of the first people who died in the Boston Massacre was a Black man, a free Black man. And he was the symbol of what a patriot was. And nobody talks about that at all. Back then, they tried to erase his name. And then they made sure that it wasn't erased. They put it out in newspapers and things like that. But you look at, here we go. Hundreds of years later, I never knew about that. I've learned about the Boston Massacre so many times. Every American history class talks about that. And we go through like 5 of them throughout the course of elementary through high school. We go at least minimum 5 of them. Never heard about that. And it's kind of done on purpose. I mean, it's very hard to deny that when it comes up so many times in these different things. And that might be a negative perspective, but it's honestly what I believe. And you can...
Go ahead, Thomas.
Okay. Yeah, I would just say that with the history portion, that I feel like with Black and brown communities and other communities, period, they just dead ended real quick. Oh no, it was just slavery. It was just the Trail of Tears, and then boom, we're done. Now we're gonna learn about, Greek. We're gonna learn about Antigone and stuff like that. So, that's what I think. It can really make people think bad about themselves too. And I think, oh, my ancestors didn't do nothing because all we're learning about is Troy and what happened in ancient Greece and stuff like that. We're not hearing about the pyramids in Egypt. We're not hearing about actually there was a Native American tribe. I don't remember which one specifically. I know someone can further educate me eventually, but we're the first open heart surgeons. Or people try to say that, oh, the reason why they were so here's my thing. How can you say that Aztecs and all them were savages and all bloodshed and eating hearts and all that when we had such detailed and intricate pyramids, when we had these statues remaining for years? Like you can't do that. That's not right. And yeah, that's just what I think too. And they probably try to do that with the Mexican flag, with the eagle getting the snake. Oh, he's just being harsh and all that. When here, I'll give you all a little history lesson. What my uncle told me about the Mexican flag origin. So basically, it just represents like natures and people, and it represents, what's the word? Dang, my bad, I lost it. What's that word? Pleasure, and just a whole bunch of things. So you got the eagle and you got the snake, right? And the snake just saw the eagle one day, and the snake was like, "Hey, eagle, teach me how to fly. I want to fly like you." And the eagle's like, "Well, no, why would I do that? You're just gonna bite me." So the eagles came down or no, he didn't. The snake kept begging the eagle. Eventually the eagle came down. Then, snake tried to get him. So then the snake, wait, what you say, Cruz? You distracted me from the story. But anyhow, the eagle was like, what'd you do that for? And the snake was basically like, oh, my bad. It's just my instinct. It's just what happens, So then the eagle was like, that I ain't gonna teach you again. And the snake begged him again. So long story short, they went back and threw it a bunch of times. Eventually, the eagle got the snake, helped him, and got his neck, trying to restrain him. And it was a dance. But people are taught that that's savagery, instead. So just these false images really is toxic. So that's just what I want to put out there.
Yeah. And yeah. And a lot of things have been erased as well. And we can just put that in modern history. A lot of revolutionary leaders were, kicked out of the country or sadly murdered, and other things like it. And then there are a lot of people who are like monumental to the movement who aren't talked about at all, or people who were trying to fight for civil rights before civil rights was a thing. There's so many stories that matter that potentially would be considered, what truly being American is, and they're ignored. And it's sad and it's unfortunate. Does anybody else want to comment?
Well, I was going to say this whole concept of erasing is nothing new. Before they erased it out the books, first of all, it wasn't erased out the books because it never was put in the books. So you can go back to ancient Kemet, which is now modern day Egypt. They erased the faces off of the monument so that they didn't look like people of color. Think about the Haram cat known as the Sphinx, right? It was intentional because they didn't want it to be known that people that look like you were the people who created this. Because what was known was that people from Europe, the Greeks, all of them, they came to this place to learn. And this was the foundation of what we know as intellectuality. This was the foundation of the sciences. It was the foundation of engineering. It was the foundation of human civilization and culture. And so that is why it is intentional that when African Americans are introduced in the American system, it is at the point of slavery, as if we did not have a history prior to American slavery. And let's be clear, let's be really clear. American slavery was not the first, and it was not the only slavery that ever happened in history, right? There was slavery before then. If one group conquered another group, they became their slaves. They were indentured servants, and in 7 years they had their freedom. What made American slavery different than any other slavery? This was the first slavery that declared the slave less than human. This was the first slavery that put a status of property or chattel. The original Constitution said the slaves were 3/5 of a human being. That's what made it different. And I think that is why anything that happened prior to that experience wasn't even included, because we were not considered to be worth including. And so let's just be clear, this erasure and the erasing and the washing of us out of the history books was before there was even an America. So I just wanted to just lay that foundation there.
American slavery was also unique in that it was the first type of slavery that enslaved a group of people entirely just based on their race. Previously, as you said, it was done based on, are you my people or are you not my people, based on geography, based on where were you born, based on national origin. That's usually what it was based on. And it oftentimes allowed the possibility of as you said, of freedom eventually once you serve the amount of time that you were meant to. Yeah, so yes, it was very different. Would anyone else like to comment on that question before we move forward? Okay. So our next question is, how can conversations about privilege and allyship be informed by intersectionality?
I can go first. I kind of talked about this earlier without realizing it, but acknowledgement is definitely the foundation there. Understanding that other people's experiences are different than yours, regardless how similar they look to you or anything like that. Other people's experiences are different than yours, and then when you take into account differences in labels or their intersections or what makes them, I mean, of course, there's going to be differences. If you're to believe, and especially in our country, we have this societal construct of uniqueness. If you want to believe that everybody's unique, why do you make it seem like everyone has the same opportunities or perspectives that you do? And one of the things that I think is needs to be considered more is by having this perspective, is it destructive to others? We talked about abortion earlier. A lot of men try their best to police or at least have a large influence on that. Um, but in theory, it does not affect us more than it does women. It should be something that's decided upon them. And to be a good ally is to now go speak to those women instead of just deciding for them. But that type of thing needs to be worked apart and needs to start being followed through it, because if we're going to work together and unite and act like we're not a divided country, that arm needs to be extended for that. And I think being an ally is understanding that at any moment you can stop being an ally. It's a continuous action that you have to continue to try and enforce. It is continuing to acknowledge that, hey, there's just something that I think is wrong, and there are people that I care about that suffer from that. And so I'm going to try to help them as much as I can and continue to keep doing that and listen to them. Don't just believe that because you've heard a couple of voices that speaks for all of them. That's not how it works. You have to keep repeatedly doing this thing because it alters and changes. Just like how we were talking about individuals alter and change, these intersections themselves alter and change as well. As we evolve as people, these things are going to shift. And so you have to acknowledge that and try to, serve that role of being an ally as well as you can. I think I'm good on that question now.
Yeah, I would say it can inform it because I think intersectionality is a way for all of us to remind ourselves of the privileges and the oppressions that we experience. I personally believe that there is no person who doesn't experience privilege in one way, shape, or form. There isn't a singular person, and what that does it humbles you. So for example, what intersectionality tells a Black man is that there, as much as I am fighting and advocating for others to acknowledge my experience, there are still others who I need to uplift and fight for in the same ways I'm expecting for people to fight for me, right? What intersectionality tells me as a Christian Black woman is that, who was born in America, and is a natural. I don't. There's like naturalized and natural born. I can never remember the difference. But point being, a person who was born in America is that, as much as I fight and advocate and stress the importance of uplifting Black female young voices, it is also my job to reach back, not that they're behind me by any means, but as far as allyship goes, to reach back or reach below and pull up or pull forward. It is just as much as I fight for others to say, open the doors for Black women, I, as a Black woman, need to open the door for others. So this conversation should be one that is ongoing, that unites all of us, to say that you may be experiencing this and you may be experiencing this and this, but this isn't a competition, right? So what we're looking for is not who's hurting more, or who's oppressed more, or who's the most privileged. It's how can I help you? Because there are white men that are less fortunate than me financially. And so if I get so stuck on this idea that the white man is the enemy, I miss the opportunity to be an ally to white men who are experiencing oppression because of their income, or to white men who are experiencing oppression because of their religion or because of where they were born, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want us to stop thinking of identity as such a cut and dry thing, because it's not, because it's complex and because it's hard and because these things are difficult for all of us to navigate. So the ways in which I think intersectionality is bonded to conversations of allyship and of I can't even remember my own question, but to allyship, the way that they're bonded together is by empathy, right? This desire for us to help one another to grow and for us to ultimately experience or reach a point where we are advocating equity rather than equality, right? And the difference between those two things being is equality is giving everybody the same thing. Equity is giving everybody the same, the what they need, the amount of resources, the amount of help, the amount of time, the amount of encouragement that they need in order to reach the same point, right? In order to remove all the obstacles so that we all have the same amount of hurdles, or in order to push all of us to the same start line. You understand? So these are the combinations or the overlap that occurs between intersectionality and allyship and empathy and community. All of these ideas are very deeply connected.
I feel like comparison is a large thing that needs to stop. As far as with allyship, whether it be with non-POCs, POCs, or POCs and POCs, because I'll just be looking through the comments and I'll be seeing Latino people throwing shade at the black people throwing shade at us Latinos, and just everywhere. And all of this is doing nothing. It's doing nothing but creating more hate. And it's a waste of time. It's no progress or anything. And people aren't going to want to do nothing. You know, they're just going to want to not do anything, not help out, nothing. So people need to quit coming with that comparing approach, you know, saying that, oh, well, you know, like, oh, you got this and I deal with this, you know, this is worse. And this, you know, all of that. People just need to be like, okay, how can I help? You know, what can I do? How can I be there to extend my hand out to you instead of trying to compare it? I think that's really a large thing I've noticed too. And people need to quit using, like, in their rebuttals and comebacks in any debate, trying to bring up and diss another culture. Because I've noticed on certain, like, Latino pages, I know there's a lot, you know, we steering from politics, but I know there's a lot of, unfortunately, Latino Trump supporters. And I just see, like, when something happens to Latino people and, you know, like the loteria, like the people on the street vendors being robbed, and if it's a black person, I'm automatically, and I'm all for protecting the street vendors. But my thing is how can we unite when you're like, oh, well, then they'll say something ridiculous like, oh, well, yeah, Black Lives Matter, or they'll just say something ridiculous and hateful like that. Like, I can't stand that. I despise the Latinos that do stuff like that. Or I'll see people talking about what's going on in the Mexican community. They'll be like, oh, well, they, you know, they're weak and stuff like that. Or go back to your country if you don't like it. Like, I'll hear sometimes black people saying that about us. It's just too much division. People need to cut all that out, because ain't nothing happening. Nothing positive is happening. We're still going to be in the same predicament. And you need to think about the children. You need to think about the future generations and what they're going to go through. If all this bickering and hate keeps on, ain't nothing going to change. So that's just what I have to say. Quit comparing. So
yeah, and we're stronger together. Like, there's no value in that. We're not necessarily fighting against individuals. I think that's what a lot of people get caught up in. We're fighting against the institutions that potentially they support, that continue to oppress the different people in separate different ways. And it's not necessarily right to try to compare those things. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say on that point. You want to take us to the next question, Kayla?
Amir or Dr. Key, did you all want to speak to that question? No? All right, then yes, I will take us to our last question of the show, which is, how does the concept of intersectionality relate to the importance of public health awareness? I know we all got to answer for this. Dr. Key was ready.
Right. Dr. Key, let us go first.
I'm
Let us
gonna
go first.
last. I'm gonna go last.
Let us go first. Let us go first. I'm gonna throw Amir under the bus. What you got?
Okay, so I think with different stuff, like, you know, the conversation we were having before of how, you know, sometimes, you know, obviously me being a black male, it's like sometimes that I think in public health where, you know, usually, I guess you can say that sometimes people of color aren't really taken as that high priority as others in some instances. And so really got to really watch out for that and be aware of that, of how, like, for example, the vaccine rollout and stuff like that, some people of color and people living in urban areas weren't getting the same amount of care as others. So we need to really see that and affect that and see how we can change it.
Yeah. And something that isn't thought of a lot is, like, let's say homelessness, for example. That impacts a lot of public health things. And then stepping similar to that, understanding health disparities and how that plays a role. For example, I'm about to steal from Dr. Key. Not depending on what communities or intersections you have, you might not be represented in the health field. So that might mean that you can't find therapists or doctors that look like you, think like you, or share sentiments that can be an ally to you. And that could be a big issue, especially when you're thinking about how public health and health itself concern you directly, whether that be sustaining your life, resources to help do that, like whether that be food choices and things like that, or it could be, for example, we were just talking about earlier how mental health isn't really, acknowledged much in the Black community. Well, we also don't have Black therapists that much. And so there's a lot of things that sometimes feel like that's being belittled because there's not someone who's experienced similar things to you. So now you just feel like the whole thing is a scam. And that doesn't, focus on the right things. And then you can even look at it from the angle that public health is more than just that, it's the policies that involve you. When you consider, for example, right now there are people trying to push for more accountability with police. That is something that impacts different intersections, whether that be Black people, Latino people, really all people, because police brutality affects a lot of different people. And so you can look at it from all those different angles, how public health can be intertwined with these different intersections. And they have to be acknowledged. Oh, I have one more, sorry. And then intersections can also shape your view on public health itself. Like, for example, the African American community has a disposition to not necessarily trust health because of the different experiments or injustices that have happened to us in the past. It's kind of hard to now accept a system that once treated you like an experiment, or one that didn't really consider your rights and things before. But what's different now is that there are things that are in place to hold those people accountable, to subject them to actually pay attention to your rights as a human. And we're starting to ease that tension now. And I think that's a positive force that's being made. But what will help that is having more people who look like us in the field.
Yes, all are good points. I would say when we speak about the Black maternal mortality rate, that's an intersection, that's an issue that occurs at the intersection that is directly related to public health. We can also talk about the mortality rate of Black trans women. That's another intersection that that is directly related to public health. We can talk about, I mean, there are so many different conversations that that are a result of resulting oppressions, uh, resulting um, intersecting oppressions, intersecting identities, intersecting experiences, intersecting um, concepts or understandings of reality. Because as Cruz said, even down to your perception of the world and of society is impacted by intersection, which is impacted by public health. Because truly, public health is just the combination of all of our individual healths put together. And because all of our individual identities directly impact the way we show up in social situations, remember I said that at the beginning, that means that means that all of our individual identities and intersections directly affect public health. or are directly related to public health and conversations of public health. And so with that, I'm just going to wrap up the youth portion because Dr. Key is going to give his answer to that question, and then he's going to close us out. So I want to thank all of you all for attending from us, and just say that this has been a great conversation. And if you want to hear more conversation like this, then come back and see us in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Kayla and Cruz. And Cruz, can you repeat the question for me again?
I
How
got you.
does the
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you got it. You got it. It's your question.
How does the concept of intersectionality relate to the importance of public health awareness?
I love the question, and it's loaded, right? And I could give you guys a real deep dive into this, but I'm going to keep it light for now. So when we think about the intersectionality of people, right? Whether you are a Black woman or a Hispanic male or a trans Hispanic woman or all these variations of identities, or an immigrant who may not even, who may be from the Middle East, right? When we think about the variations of this, public health, one quick, easy way to see it is race has a direct correlation with place, and place has a direct correlation with health. So therefore, race has a direct correlation with health. Think about the built environment. Think about redlining. Think about in the 1940s when the intersection of government and housing and banking and finances intersected and came together with racist laws that prohibited people of color from getting home loans in certain zip codes, which was the start of creating segregated zip codes or segregated neighborhoods post-slavery, right? And so the next predictor of life expectancy other than your genetic code is your zip code. And so when we think about how these were intersections put in place and held together by racist policies that were done in the 1930s and 40s. But if you fast forward to 20 and 21, and we look at zip codes now, the predominant groups of people who have the lowest life expectancy and poor health outcomes because their neighborhoods are built near factories, their neighborhoods experience high levels of lead in the paint, in the air, poor air quality. Those are predominantly communities of color. So place and health has a lot to do with race. And that's public health all day, every day, whether you're a Black trans woman, whether you are a Black heterosexual male, whether you are a Black woman, whatever your intersectionality is with your identities. There are things that just because you were in 48505 growing up or 48504, then those are things that will touch you more so than it would those that are living out in suburbia. So that's one way our intersectionalities intersect with public health every day, because certain people have been historically forced to live in certain areas, and those areas tend to have poor quality of soil, air, water, lower employment, high crime. It's so many caveats to public health. So again, this was a wonderful conversation on intersectionality, not only the intersectionality of our identities, but the intersection of the systems that touch our various identities. We thank you all for tuning in out in social media land. We will be here again the week after next at 6:30 p.m. We invite you to come back and to share in another youth perspective. And next time, invite 2 or 3 other people and have them share with us. We thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, and everyone, good night.